Now, in my previous video regarding Muhammad Ali, by the way, I'll have the link to that video down in the description, as YouTube took the liberty of completely obliterating it with copyrights to the point where it no longer got out. In that video, one of the things that we went over was one of the things that Muhammad Ali is best known for: his fight with the American government after he refused to be drafted into the army due to his religious beliefs. Beliefs that stemmed from Ali's both witnessing and experiencing the depths of racial injustice in this country that he was being called to serve. To many, this move to fight against the oppressive power made and still does make Muhammad Ali a symbol of freedom to this very day. He may have earned his title as the greatest of all time through his boxing conquests. However, it was him fighting for what he believed in, no matter the cost, that cemented that belief in the minds of his audience. That's the Muhammad Ali that we like to remember. The other side of Ali, though, is one that appears in stark contrast to the side in which we hold dear, as it's a side that reveals that no matter how great you are or are perceived to be, you are still only human, and no human has or ever will be perfect. Everyone has their dark side, especially someone like Muhammad Ali, whose light spanned throughout the nations. But wherever the light shines, a shadow is also cast. And one of the first people who found themselves cast in the darkness of Ali's shadow was another historical figure, and one of the primary leaders of the Islamic way of life that Ali now called his own: Malcolm X. Now, before Muhammad Ali became one of the most prominent figures in the Nation of Islam, there was Malcolm X. After being one of Harlem's most notorious hustlers, where he meddled in everything from using and selling every narcotic that could be found, all the way to armed robbery, this sticky web of the hustler lifestyle in which he was firmly ensnared eventually led Malcolm to have to serve 7 years in prison. However, during those 7 years, he would go on to make a transformation that would drastically change not just his future, but the future of the world as we know it, as he entered into the cage that society sees fit for those who are struggling the most to get by, a feral man, a man who had up until that point gotten by on instincts alone, instincts that told him to look out for no one but himself, and do whatever he had to do to survive. After those 7 years though, he emerged a completely different man, a man who would go on to become one of the most influential leaders of all time, where he would meet, dine, and most importantly, discuss and philosophize with other influential leaders from around the world. See, during his time in prison, Malcolm X completely reformed himself with the help of one other person, Elijah Muhammad, the man in charge of the Nation of Islam. Both Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X at one point in time considered Elijah Muhammad as some sort of a prophet and a father figure, preaching both the past and present evils of those who had killed and enslaved hundreds of millions of Africans while using their own version of Christianity to help along the way, garnered Elijah Muhammad an immense amount of respect from not only Ali and X, but by a legion of African American men who grew larger and larger by the day, all swearing loyalty to the Nation of Islam and the, as he was known, Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And to an extent, Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam did do some good in the lives of their followers, a majority of whom came from the gutters of the American society, men who were involved in the very same thing in which Malcolm X was involved with before he too joined the nation: drugs, stealing, killing, whatever they had to do to try and get by. Elijah Muhammad helped these men and offered them a community to be a part of and a different lifestyle so they could cast away the shackles of oppression that had been placed upon them. So in that respect, Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam were great, since if not for them, a majority of the men who joined the nation would have either ended up dead on the streets or spent their entire lives in an endless cycle of forced servitude behind bars. However, just as every person has their dark side, so too did Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. If you once believed the truth, and now you are beginning to doubt the truth, you didn't believe the truth in the first place. What could make you doubt the truth other than your own weak self. This is the response that Malcolm X received from Elijah Muhammad after he tried to appeal Muhammad's decision to suspend his brother Reginald from the Nation of Islam for dating a woman who wasn't of the nation herself. See, the nation had its rules, most of which stemmed from the rules of the Islamic religion. And believe me, there is a difference between the nation and the religion of Islam. A massive difference. And that difference is that the Islamic religion is one that promotes peace among all people, regardless of race. The Nation of Islam preached hate, condemning all white people as devils, with very few to no exceptions. And this was so Elijah Muhammad could use the rage and anger he instilled in those who followed him to control and manipulate them, like his own army, a nation composed of militant men who would all lay down their lives for the well-being of their leader, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And it wouldn't take long for Malcolm to come to terms with this reality, the reality that the person who he too was ready to die for and considered to be the second holiest being besides God, or Allah himself, wasn't as pure or honorable as he claimed to be. As after Malcolm's brother Reginald eventually wound up leaving the Nation of Islam over being suspended for having a relationship with a non-Muslim, an event that caused his friends and family to isolate him to the point where it quite literally drove him insane, X discovered that the claims his brother was making of Elijah Muhammad being a hypocrite and also having inappropriate sexual relations was true. Even though Elijah Muhammad had a wife at the time, it became known to X that he would often sleep around with women who had no relationship to the Nation of Islam. Now the man who, once again, was thought by Malcolm to be second in holiness to only Allah himself, could no longer be seen by Malcolm as anything but just another man grappling to deal with the evils of humanity. So with that being the case, Malcolm X decided it best to leave the Nation of Islam in order to create an organization that was truly dedicated to the betterment of life for African Americans and people of color worldwide. Only problem was that leaving the Nation of Islam often came with a price. And for most, that price was their life. You left the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That was the wrong thing to do. Before his departing the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali were like brothers. Malcolm, being one of the few Muslims who supported Ali before he became champion of the world, was sort of something like a big brother to Ali in a sense where he took him under his wing, teaching him what he had learned during his time in prison. After departing the Nation of Islam though, the relationship between X and Ali took a completely different tone. To Ali, Malcolm X was as good as dead. I don't even think about him. He's nothing but a fellow who was an ex-dope addict, a prisoner, a jailbird who had no education, couldn't read or write, who heard about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who took him off the streets, cleaned him up, and educated him enough to go out there and debate. He is no longer Malcolm X. He's just Malcolm Little nothing. Besides constantly degrading the name of his former friend when the topic arose, Muhammad Ali would also go out and to warn Malcolm X that anyone else who attacks or does anything to Elijah Muhammad will die. Malcolm X, though, didn't need Ali to tell him that his life was in danger. He knew the moment that he left the Nation of Islam that every day after that was simply borrowed time. He had even told Muhammad Ali himself that no one leaves the nation without trouble. The final interaction between Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali came just a few months after Ali's championship fight versus Sonny Liston. He was vacationing at the same time Malcolm X was on a pilgrimage in the Middle East as well as parts of Africa, learning of what he described as true Islam, an experience for Malcolm that changed the belief Elijah Muhammad helped instill in him that all white men were evil. My religious pilgrimage to Mecca has given me a new insight into the true brotherhood of Islam, which encompasses all races of mankind. That's the new message that Malcolm began preaching. Dressed in attire familiar to the people of the East, Muhammad Ali almost didn't recognize Malcolm when they saw each other at the airport. Malcolm, though, instantly recognized Ali. Ecstatic to see the man who he still considered to be a brother, Malcolm rushed to greet him. However, in exchange for his warm embrace, Malcolm was met with coldness. Muhammad Ali ignored Malcolm, afterwards making fun of X for how he looked and the clothes that he was wearing, saying that this was just proof that no one should ever go against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm X was just beginning to give a speech in Harlem when all of a sudden a commotion broke out in the crowd. Smoke from a smoke bomb began filling the air, making it impossible for anyone to see what was happening on stage. Not that anyone needed to guess what had happened when the sounds of shotgun blasts began to ring in the auditorium. His wife, who was in attendance, was the first to the stage, as she bent down and began weeping over her husband, whose chest had been riddled by the shells of a sawed-off shotgun. Malcolm X was pronounced dead on the scene. Police, despite seeming indifferent about the death of a man who many Americans hated, proclaiming that his life work was nothing more than hate speech, didn't take long to find the suspects. 3 individuals who were all former members of the Nation of Islam were taken into custody, though 2 of the men arrested actually had nothing to do with the murder, as a third man, who was indeed in on the hit, testified, and still testifies to this day, that it didn't go down the way authorities said it did, and that the other 2 men who were arrested had nothing to do with Malcolm's death. And over the years, these claims gave birth to numerous conspiracy theories around who really killed Malcolm X, as some think that it was a job pulled off by someone in power, since there wasn't a single police officer in a 3-block radius during the time of Malcolm's event. Still, the official word dictates that it was the Nation of Islam who killed Malcolm X. And the next move that was supposedly taken by the Nation of Islam does indicate, at the very least, that they were aware of the action that was going to be taken against Malcolm right there, since merely hours after the death of X, a bullet from a rifle pierced through the glass of the apartment owned by Muhammad Ali. It was a warning, letting him know that he too could and would be killed should he ever choose to walk down the same path as X. That, though, meaning leaving the Nation of Islam and Elijah Muhammad, wasn't even a thought in the mind of Ali at the time. In fact, he initially showed little to no sorrow over Malcolm's death whatsoever. His approach was more of a he got what was coming to him type of mentality. At the time, he didn't really care. Why should he? After all, he was too busy being infatuated with the new love of his life and his newly married wife, Sonia Roy, who was just one of the many partners that Ali would take throughout the course of his life. As in the next part of his story, Muhammad Ali would truly begin to show his colors, to show the quickly festering darkness that was slowly beginning to come to light.